I am convinced that a light rail system in Kentucky would help bridge the gap between have and have-not Kentucky. It makes more sense to me to bring the worker to the job than it does the job to the worker. We have built industrial development sites, and I guarantee you, I won't embarrass you, Joe, or a bunch of them, me too. How many industrial sites have we built across Kentucky, not only in eastern Kentucky, but all across Kentucky, that are just sitting there growing grass? And it's becoming a cost issue just to mow the daggone grass on. So that concept is not working everywhere. So what do we learn from that? We learn that didn't work. You know, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and think you're going to get a different result? I believe it's better to take the worker to the job. And I think that what we ought to figure out how to do is do some creative things with a light rail system in this state so that we can take workers from rural Kentucky, move them to our metropolitan areas where economic opportunities and jobs are plentiful, and then return them home that night. Now that sounds like a pipe dream, I know. No southern state has done that. Remember this, no southern state, none of our competitor states have ever tried anything like that. It does two things. One, it allows the worker to stay where he or she wants to live, and that's in their home in rural Kentucky. But two, it provides a stable workforce for prospective employers. Now you can look at every one of the variables that you want to about economic growth and attracting new jobs, but the one thing that every employer will tell you, the most important thing, it's not the tax structure, it's not necessarily the educational training necessarily, it is the stability of the workforce. They want a stable workforce, and it just makes sense. Think of your jobs and your family businesses, the opportunities that you have. You know, what do you want? You rely upon your employees, you want a stable workforce. You can compete if you have a stable workforce. So by bringing workers to that area every day, we would assure that that workforce pool was vibrant and stable. And I believe that that's something that needs to be talked about. That's really the end of my comments. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has to ask. If anybody has any questions they'd like to ask, I'd be happy to answer those. Yes, sir.
How far out from the metro areas would you envision your light rail system to operate?
Probably at least 50 and preferably closer to 100 miles. The University of Kentucky did a study, actually, it's sitting on a shelf over there several years ago, about what impact it would have. And they would recommend somewhere between 50 and 100 miles. And Louisville's a good example. Take the city of Louisville. You know, you've got great interstates approaching from the south and from the east. So the workforce that lives in Shelby County or the workforce that lives down in Bullitt County or even Hardin County or beyond can get to and from. But what if you go west? You know, you don't have a good transportation system to get down into Breckinridge County or Meade County. So what if you had a light rail system that would take that worker from Breckinridge County or from Brandenburg down to Muhlenberg County and bring him or her to Louisville, you know, on a low-cost public transportation system to work here in this metropolitan area and then return them there that night. And that's about roughly, you know, 40 miles, 50 miles or so. Depends on how you run that thing. But yeah, I mean, it's I think it's the one thing that a state could do and be able to tout themselves as being innovative to the rest of the nation as far as attracting new jobs and new employers to the area. Yes, sir.
Without meaningful tax reform, how would you fund that?
Well, there's a lot of ways. Actually, our transportation fund is in pretty good shape. You know, we have two funds, the general fund and the transportation fund. But you probably have to have some source, a dedicated source of revenue to do that with. It would likely be some way to pay for whatever bonds were required to construct that. So you'd have to look at some. It's kind of like the bridges, you know, and you know, I mean, people don't want to talk about it, but the fact of the matter is, if you want that type of large public improvement in infrastructure, it's likely you're going to talk about tolls or some sort of a fee. You know, you can't charge the rider as much as it costs Don because it would be cost prohibitive. So government would step in. You know, I believe that that's the role of government. I believe the role of government is to step in when the private market doesn't provide whatever it provides. Obviously, the government has a responsibility, other constitutionally mandated responsibilities. But on economic development, government can step in and make a difference, and we've seen that in job creation pretty much all across Kentucky. Some areas it didn't work, and we talked about those earlier. But I believe that you could create a system, and you wouldn't have to build a whole system at once. The way I would envision doing it, you do it like you would anything else, a test market. My area of Eastern Kentucky, or Senator Stivers's area of Eastern Kentucky, if we could get our workers closer to the metropolitan areas, the so-called Golden Triangle, it would enhance their opportunities for employment dramatically. If you could get on a light rail system in Sagersville, Judge Harden, and ride it to Lexington, it's about 100 miles. But if you could do that every day, I think obviously it would enhance the area back home, because there'd be more, they'd bring the money home. And two, I think it would enhance the opportunities in Lexington because you provide a stable workforce. And the stable workforce is the key. It's education and a stable workforce. That's really what employers want.